Good morning and welcome to Search the Scriptures. My name is Scott McCown. I'm minister at the Church of Christ in Parrish, Alabama. And again, as always, we welcome your comments, we welcome your suggestions, we welcome your questions about the things that we say and the things that we do. Now, just recently, we started our series going through the Bible as we search the Scriptures. We began not long ago with Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 simply says, "In the beginning, God." What a way to start the Scriptures. What a way to begin the whole concept of what the Bible is about. Well, when we were together the last time, we worked through Genesis and Exodus. So we begin today with Leviticus. Go ahead and open to that third book of the Bible, the book of Leviticus. It is the book of the law. Leviticus is the commands given by God through Moses to the tribe of Levi that they were to instruct to the people and how they were to conduct things and as pertains to worship and as pertains to God. It may be that Leviticus is one of the lesser read and maybe lesser understood books of the Bible for most of us. But nonetheless, Leviticus is a monumental book. It's a book and a work about worship. It's a work about holiness. And it's a work about the priesthood. So as we turn to Leviticus and we study it together, there are a number of things that you and I can gain from it, even today as we as Christians look back on the Old Testament. One of the major thrusts of the book of Leviticus is something that the Apostle Peter mentions. In 1 Peter 1 and verse 16, I believe, he says, "Be holy," quoting from God, "as I am holy." God is saying, be separate, be sanctified, be holy as I am holy. And the book of Leviticus, the book of Leviticus runs that course, helps us to understand the holiness of God and what God expects of us as His holy offspring. Leviticus chapter 23, and I want to start there. I know that's not the beginning of the book, but I'm going to look at Leviticus 23 because in Leviticus 23, we have the description of the feast that God's people would celebrate. And you see that the Sabbath day is mentioned, the Passover, the Feast of First Fruits, the Feast of Weeks, the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Booths. Well, in those feasts, in those special days, there are three feasts which really comprise, I think, the three main feasts of Judah, of Israel during that time. And they are the Passover, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Booths, or the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, in each one of these has a messianic thrust to it. So I want to look at the first one of these. Turn with me to Leviticus 23, and let's look at verse 4. Leviticus 23, verse 4. "These are the appointed feasts of the Lord, the holy convocations which you shall proclaim at that time appointed for them. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, at twilight, is the Lord's Passover. And on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread to the Lord. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work, but you shall present a food offering to the Lord for 7 days. On the seventh day is a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work." Now you may remember what the Passover commemorates. Now it's not described here in Leviticus 23, but we can read about it in other places. The Passover reminded the children of Israel about that evening, that point in time when the 10th plague came upon Egypt and the blood of the lamb was on their doorpost, on their lintels, and they'd eaten the lamb and they had made preparations to leave. They were not to eat any leavened bread. They weren't to take the time to do that. It was a hurry. It was a rush. So it was to commemorate that event when they began the Exodus. Now, you could turn to 1 Corinthians 5 and verse 7. And you find Paul saying this: Christ is our Passover lamb. When you think about death, passing over the children of Israel, saving their firstborn because of the blood of the Lamb. You come to the New Testament and you see God passing over our sin when we are washed in the blood of the Lamb. Passover, a messianic feast, if you will. The second one that I want to look at is the Feast of Weeks. It begins, the description of the Feast of Weeks begins about verse 15 of Leviticus 23. And you shall count 7 full weeks from the day after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering. You shall count 50 days to the day of the 7th Sabbath. And you shall present a grain offering of new grain to the Lord. And you shall bring from your dwelling places 2 loaves of bread to be waved, made with 2/10 of an ephah, and they shall be of fine flour, and they shall be baked with leaven as first fruits to the Lord. And you shall present with the bread 7 lambs, a year old, without blemish, and 1 bull from the herd, and 2 rams. And they shall be a burnt offering to the Lord, with their grain offering, and the drink offering, and a food offering, with a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And you shall offer 1 male goat for a sin offering, and 2 male lambs, a year old, as a sacrifice of peace offerings. And the priest shall wave them with the bread of the first fruits as a wave offering before the Lord with the 2 lambs, and they shall be holy to the Lord for the priest. And you shall make the proclamation the same day. You shall hold a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work. It is a statute forever in all your dwelling places throughout your generations. And when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge. You shall gather the gleanings and so on, and leave them for the poor. Now, that Feast of Weeks, there's 50 days that are counted to the Sabbath after the 7th Sabbath. Now, we know this feast under a different name. We know it as Pentecost, meaning 50 days. Pentecost was a celebration for Israel because in their tradition and their understanding in God's direction, this celebration of 50 days of Pentecost was a day that the law was given to Moses. 50 days after that Passover, 50 days after they left Egypt, they're given the law. So this celebration was a reminder of the law that God had given, a reminder when God gave the law. Now, if we were to go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, read somewhere around verse 4, Paul saying that Christ was the rock that followed Israel in the desert, sustaining them, taking care of them. And you begin to see also that it was the law that went forth from Zion on the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. So many connections between these feasts and Christ and the Messiah and the church. Now, let's look at the third one of these feasts that I want to focus on, and that is the Feast of Booths, the Feast of Tabernacles, beginning about verse 33. On the 15th day of the 7th month, for 7 days, is the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles to the Lord. On the first day shall be a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work. For 7 days you shall present food offerings to the Lord. On the 8th day you shall hold a holy convocation and present a food offering to the Lord. It is a solemn assembly, and you shall not do any ordinary work. These are the appointed feasts of the Lord, which you shall proclaim in times of convocation for presenting the Lord food offerings and burnt offerings and sacrifices and drink offerings, each on its proper day. Now, verse 39, on the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered the produce of the land, you shall celebrate the feast of the Lord 7 days. On the first day shall be a solemn rest, on the 8th day shall be a solemn rest. And you shall take on the first day the fruit of splendid trees and branches of palm leaves and boughs and leafy willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before the Lord. And you shall celebrate it as a feast to the Lord for 7 days in the year. As a statute throughout your generations, you shall celebrate it and celebrate the 7th month. Verse 42, and you shall dwell in booths, tabernacles, for 7 days. All native Israelites shall dwell in booths, that your generations may know that I made the people of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them, or tabernacles, when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Here, this Feast of Tabernacles is 1 Corinthians 10. The reminder that God took care of them. The reminder that they dwelt in temporary places, but God was taking care of them. And then we mentioned Pentecost, the Feast of Weeks. The reminder that the law went forth from Jerusalem, or the law went forth from God at Sinai on that 50th day. And the day of Pentecost is the day where the establishment of the church in Jerusalem. Now, it's interesting to note when we go back to the day of Pentecost, and I should have brought this up already, it was About 3,000 people died in Exodus 32 because of their sin when the law was given, that golden calf. About 3,000 died. I find it interesting, ironic maybe, worthy of note at least, that on the day of Pentecost, 3,000 obeyed the gospel and were saved. I don't know that there is an intentional connection, but I do know that that is very interesting to me. Well, continuing with Leviticus. There is a theme of Leviticus that is thematic of the entire Bible, and that theme is redemption. Worship, devotion, homage, and loyalty are Old Testament themes. They're New Testament principles. But when we approach God, what we're seeing is, in the beginning, God created. Man fell. God prepared a way for man to return. God prepared a people. In Leviticus, we begin to see these people forming, getting their law, beginning that journey to that land where they would be a people and bring about the birth of the Messiah. What we offer God, Leviticus 1 and verse 3, comes from our own voluntary will. When we approach God in holiness, we approach Him as He is. When we fail to approach Him in holiness, we fail to give Him the glory He is due. This was the mistake of Aaron's sons in Leviticus 10, which we'll probably come back to sometime in the next day or so. Leviticus is an interesting book. Yes, there's a lot of law and there's some things that you read and you go, well, wait a minute, how does that apply? It applies, much of it applies in this way. It reminds us that God is holy. It reminds us that God is different. God is not you and God is not me and God is not like you and like me. We are made in His image. So there are ways in which we are like Him, but He is so far removed from us that we are not Him and He is not us. But what He wants of us is for us to approach Him in a spirit of holiness, because He is the one that is worthy of our worship. He is the one that is worthy of our devotion. Genesis 1, He's our Creator. Exodus, He's the Savior of His people. Leviticus, He's the lawgiver. And He's the one who directs us on how to come back to Him. Those are the things that we will continue to see in the book of Leviticus. And then if time permits this week, we're going to look at Numbers and maybe even Deuteronomy as we get through the week. I've enjoyed our time together this morning. We'll continue with the book of Leviticus tomorrow morning, and I hope that you will be here with us as we continue to search the Scriptures, going through the Bible book by book. Until the next time that we're together, may God bless you and bless your day.